take action accordingly. So I wanted to talk about that video with the mayor being tagged for that reason, because it's just another example of how deeply ingrained certain perspectives are in the horse world and how people respond to them. For example, people want to be able to post videos of them handling horses who are saying very clear no's and showing a lot of pain and stress behaviors. And they feel entitled to sharing those videos on public platforms without meeting any judgment or concern for it. And this is a problem because it creates this narrative in their heads where they're entitled to doing whatever they want to horses, publicly documenting it, and then they also feel entitled to the response that their posts receive. And this is something that we need to kind of talk about in the industry, because it leads to a lot of pressure on those who point out these issues to be silenced and to kind of look the other way. When in reality, if you film yourself training a horse or tacking them and they are violently saying no with high stress behaviors and just very clear pain behaviors, if you choose to document that and post it to social media, you're opening yourself up to judgment. Honestly, in any case that you're handling horses, you're opening yourself up to judgment when you document what you're doing and you share it online. And that's part of it. So if you choose to make light out of behaviors that are well documented across studies as being associated with stress and pain, inevitably you're going to invite commentary on those topics from people who see what you're posting and are concerned about it as a result. And you're not entitled to people only responding with support. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this is that people who post videos of them training horses in an unethical manner where they have the horse violently displaying stress signals want to be able to do that unchecked. And then when they are checked, they want to frame themselves as being the victim, where they will then take the response of other people being like, hey, that horse is saying a hard no and they're showing pain behaviors, and they try to place themselves in the spot of the victim, being like, people are being critical of my post, this is so unfair, this shouldn't happen. And in doing so, it's trying to rebrand any type of advocacy or criticism of the way things are done as being bullying, which it can toe the line of bullying depending on how people go about it. However, if you post a video that goes viral beforehand and has thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views, and then people see it and they start sharing that video and responding to it, that's something that you signed up for as soon as you hit publish on the video, because you're not entitled to a certain response when you post anything, no matter how benign and harmless it is. You could post a video of you trying on a shirt and you're not entitled to people being like, I like that shirt. So it's interesting to me because I've had people comment on that video in defense of what is going on in the video, and then also try to imply that me commenting in the way that I did is inherently unfair and shouldn't be allowed to happen. But meanwhile, the people who are pushing that narrative feel like they should be able to share them doing whatever they want to horses without any criticism or any commentary at all on what's going on. And it's a really dangerous mindset to have, because it essentially creates an environment where people can post whatever they want with animals, doing whatever they want to them and training horses in whatever way, but then the response is then viewed as bullying. And the thing that I find so interesting about this mindset is that it's never viewed as bullying if you look at what they're doing to the horse, where the horse is restrained and gagged in their response to try to tell the rider no, or don't get on me, or I don't want this. The horse is restrained in a number of different ways to try to prevent them from really saying a hard no and behaving very dangerously. And there's a whole number of equipment that you can purchase and use to try to restrain that response even more. And people don't view that as bullying, which I find interesting, because on the flip side, online, you can block people that you don't like. You can block people that are saying things that you don't like. But horses cannot block their rider. The closest a horse could get to blocking their rider or their handler is hurting them in such a bad way that they cannot continue responding to them in that moment. And then even then, if the horse were to do that, they would be labeled as a dangerous horse, and it would probably be a situation where the next person to handle the horse would handle them more aggressively to try to show them for their response to the person that they caused harm to. So what I wanted to talk about is that there's nuance involved in anything online. Whereas, like, if you post a video of you handling a horse in a way that your audience doesn't agree with and that people bring to light a bunch of different examples of why it's not okay, you have the option of taking that and responding to it and going, you know what, I hadn't considered that. I hadn't considered that this behavior might be stemming from pain. I hadn't considered that this behavior might be stemming from stress. And now that people have brought that to my attention, I'm going to reflect on it accordingly. That is an option that people have. And if more people did that, I think they would find that the tone would shift and that they would be met with a lot of positive feedback about how open they are to admit the mistake. But the problem is that a lot of people double down and they want to continue defending their actions and they want to continue being able to do so and get support for that. And then when they don't, they want to continue victimizing themselves when the actual issue is usually that people are not taking accountability for their actions and what they're actually poking fun at. If you take a video of you tacking up a horse who is violently resisting to the point where the horse is muzzled to avoid biting someone, and you post it online with a funny little caption that's like, oh, tacking up mares be like, you are making light out of a situation that is depicting an animal in distress. And the choice to do that comes with consequences where other people who see it for what it is are going to comment on the fact that, hey, like, that's not okay. And we have choices and there's resulting consequences for those choices. And with the state of the horse world and how normalized certain treatment of horses is and how normalized it is to handle them in an aggressive manner and how normalized it is to ignore these stress behaviors, it isn't reasonable to expect everyone to know that these things are wrong. However, with the state of social media and how accessible information is and how people comment and talk about these things, there is a lot of access to information that conflicts with preconceived notions that people can have. And also, I've seen people posting studies on posts like this where they're like, hey, here's some information on horse stress behavior that you can check out, and here's a link. So at some point, we do have to acknowledge that there is a certain level of decided ignorance in the horse world where people are offered information where they can learn about why something might not be okay and they don't even go look at it. They just resist it because it feels like a threat. And then they're still upset at the response they're receiving, even though their actions are showing that they are not open to change. And this is a repeated issue that I see in the horse world. Even recently with like elite level riders who are captured riding in ways that are not okay. Like Isabel Worth has done it twice now, once with the blue tongue during the Olympics, and then second time is now during the report regarding the competition in Amsterdam back in January and the amount of blue tongue photos that there are of her from that. And both times she's doubled down and has stated that it's just people trying to reflect her in a bad light and that she doesn't believe her horse is in any pain and there's nothing wrong. And again, this is just yet another example of the refusal to take any accountability from horse people where they will say that they're in the sport for the horse and that it's for the love of the horse and that they love handling horses and that it's all about the horse and the horse comes first. But in practice, if you actually watch their actions, it's not about that. Because if it was, that's where we should be pausing for a moment and considering, especially if a ton of different people are bringing stuff to your attention, including welfare professionals and equine scientists and veterinarians. If they're saying, hey, this is not right, that is an open door for you to go, okay, wait, maybe I am doing something wrong. And even just pausing for a second, and even honestly, just for the good press aspect of it, even if these people didn't mean what they are saying, what astounds me is still the lack of willingness to say anything to try to make it seem like they're more connected to reflecting on welfare and being like, hey, I've reviewed these photos and I've listened to some of these people's concerns and I'm going to look further into this. And it could even just be a comment that's as simple as that, but even that is so uncommon to see across any horse people that it seems like it's an unlikely expectation to have, even though these people are adults and they should be self-reflecting. And I understand how hard it is to consider the fact that you might have caused harm to an animal that you love, because it can feel like you're admitting to being a bad person if you acknowledge how you might have caused harm to a horse that you care about. But the commitment to doubling down and refusing to consider that there could have been any bad decision making that resulted in discomfort of the horse, that is what actually makes your character look bad, is the commitment to staying that way and the refusal to reflect. I find it to be a very green flag anytime someone does self-reflect and anytime they can be open about where they might have gone wrong. It, to me, tells me that they're a safer person to be around, because they're the type of person who, if you tell them, hey, you've hurt my feelings, or hey, I didn't like that, they're more likely to pause for a minute and go, whoops, that wasn't my intention. I don't want to make you feel that way. I'm going to take note of this and pivot and adjust my behavior accordingly. But it's a hard trait to come by, because a lot of people view admitting that they're wrong as a weakness. And it's so apparent in the horse world. And I think that that's also a dynamic that we need to unpack, because I think that it stems from how riders are typically trained as well, and how many of us join the sport as impressionable young children, and even like how normalized it is to talk to children in an abusive manner and to be really hard on kids, and just that whole dynamic that's at play around the barn. It's effectively conditioning people to associate their value as a person with how much they know about horses, what kind of rider they are, how well they do at shows. And they feel that admitting any weakness in that area is basically devaluing themselves as a human being, when that's not the case. You can be a good rider and a bad horse person. You can be a good horse person and a bad rider. They're not two mutually inclusive things. And that's something that we need to look at more too, because there's riders who are great at piloting around a Grand Prix show jumping course, or can put down a Grand Prix dressage test, but that doesn't mean that they are the voice of reason and expertise on how to care for horses in the barn, or what horse behavior looks like. There's different layers of expertise, and most people who are top riders are not educated on horse welfare and horse behavior, which means that it makes it very easy for them, unless they're actively growing and changing and seeking out information, it makes it very easy for them to make mistakes and to say and do the wrong things and to misinterpret behaviors, especially when these stress behaviors are so common at certain levels of horse care and like horse riding. And it makes it almost inevitable that people are going to make these mistakes. But then the problem is that we're referencing these top riders or people who are professionals in training and riding without any type of expertise on behavior. We're also, as an industry, giving them license to be an expert on welfare and horse behavior too, when they are not, instead of looking at them as two separate things. Someone could be a really good race rider, they could be a good dressage rider, they could be a good show jumper, they could be a barrel racer who's highly successful, but that doesn't mean that they know anything about horse behavior from a scientific lens. And it also doesn't mean that they're operating without bias. And that's the biggest thing, is a lot of people have heavy bias in the way that they perceive horses and horse behavior and horse training. And unless they really want to reflect and start unpacking that and deep dive into more information that's going to challenge their belief systems, they can't evade that bias, because it is so ingrained in the horse community, and it requires work that is reliant on you being uncomfortable in order to really make those big shifts and changes. So I wanted to bring that up, because I find that, like, when I talk about these things, there's a lot of pushback where people will be like, you shouldn't have shared that video, when it's a public video. And it's like, this person chose to post this publicly, and if you're posting with the intent of only getting one specific response, and I think the answer needs to be, maybe reconsider what you post on social media and whether or not you should be posting if your willingness to share these things is reliant on only receiving a highly specific response and only receiving people who are applauding what you're doing and saying, because that's not a realistic perspective to come to expect to attract when you're posting things, no matter what it is. And the other thing too is that there's a higher level of criticism and policing of the posts of people who are commenting on issues in horse training and care. There's a higher standard that those people are being held to in terms of how nice they need to be, and their tone and the way that they need to come across, and how perfectly that advocacy has to be, to the point where it's essentially the only realistic alternative is to just say nothing. And that's exactly the intent behind it, in my opinion. But there's very little reflection on what the people who are doing these things to the horses should be doing and considering to be more considerate of the horse. So the way we have been framing things in the industry is that you need to be extremely considerate of other riders, to the point where you enable them in doing harmful things to horses, because exposing the fact that they're being harmful hurts their feelings. But on the flip side, sorry, there's no desire or pressure to do the same for horses, where it's like, hey, like, they can't advocate for themselves. Maybe we should pause a moment and consider how our actions impact them and alter things accordingly. There's a higher degree of pressure to cater to the people in the horse industry than there is to cater to the horses, when realistically the horses and their welfare should be the central point of the entire industry, because they are the only voiceless beings in this industry, and they cannot expressly consent to the things that we're doing for them. So it's our job to go above and beyond to consider their welfare and to have these discussions, even if it makes people uncomfortable. And if we're not doing that, then we need to reflect on whether or not the sport ought to exist, because realistically, this should just be like a byproduct of having access to animals in any type of sporting industry. We should be considering these things as a necessary component of working with horses, and it's not happening. And I just find it highly frustrating anytime I have to deal with people who view it as so aversive to be told, hey, like, that horse is showing pain behaviors, to the point where they feel like no one should be able to do that because it causes them discomfort, but then there's no reflection on the discomfort that they might be causing the horse. There's a lot of hypocrisy involved, because people are very attuned to how being held accountable hurts their feelings and how it makes them feel, but then there's less of an awareness of how their behavior may make the horse feel, and how the equipment they use may make the horse feel, and how the living situation of the horse may make the horse feel. So what I would encourage everyone to do is to consider the fact that any amount of discomfort that you experience from someone sharing an opinion online that you don't agree with, any amount of discomfort you experience from that probably is not even a fraction of what the average horse experiences in their lifetime. Because you we can advocate for ourselves on social media. If someone doesn't like my post, they can block me. They never have to see my post again, and they can just move on. But the issue is that they feel so justified in their position that they want to try to neutralize me as a threat by arguing with me and trying to discredit me online, so they don't block me. And then them commenting on my post causes them to show up on their page more, and also boost other creators who are posting stuff like me. And then they get increasingly more angry at these creators, even though they're creating the exact environment that they're going to see these types of posts in. Meanwhile, the horse who is in a training situation, who might be living like 18 plus hours a day in a stall, they cannot let themselves out of the stall. They cannot go fill themselves an extra hay net to make sure they have more forage. They cannot take the bit out of their mouth and make it so that they don't have to be piloted around by a harsh piece of equipment. They cannot advocate for themselves and get the person to stop beating the crap out of them in training. They have very limited options. So if we can empathize with people and the discomfort that they experience from online posts, because I'm not going door to door knocking on these people's doors and harassing them with content in the middle of the night. It's all online, and I usually don't even live in the same country as these people. But the horse cannot exit those situations as freely as people can. And yet there is typically a higher degree of empathy for the people who are experiencing discomfort because of the information being released or the response to stuff that they choose to post online publicly. And it's really interesting because it doesn't really make sense. If we can empathize with the fact that someone might be uncomfortable hearing information that doesn't feel good to them, we should be able to empathize with the horse and the fact that it might not feel good to them to be spurred repeatedly in the ribs, or to be yanked on in the bridle, or to be tacked when they're clearly experiencing physical discomfort. And I think that's where we need to shift our thinking, because the discomfort of having to hear opinions online is not even close to the discomfort that we ask horses to be in on a daily basis while performing at a high level and doing really hard physical feats. And it is so far off base that you can't even really like compare the two. And there's just a huge disconnect for people when it comes to considering the perspective of the horse and how they're actually experiencing the world around them and what we do. And I say this as someone who posts my own riding online and my own stuff online with my horses all the time. And I'm met with people who try to come at me and say nasty things to me about my horses and whatnot too. But the interesting thing is the critiques that I get for my horses now are largely not related to how I'm handling them. They're not related to whether or not the horse is being handled ethically. It's mocking the fact that I use rewards-based training and claiming that my horses must be badly behaved because of it. Or sometimes people will comment on the mud in their field because I live in the Pacific Northwest and it rains like 90% of the year, like constantly here. And that's just the way it is. And, you know, like I would love to have less mud, but I live in an area where that's just not going to happen. And they're fine. So they don't have health issues from it. So it's like not something that I'm particularly concerned about. But people will pick these things that are largely not actually related to well-being at all. But I invited that by posting online. I invited those other perspectives from people by posting online. And they can view however I handle my horses in their own perspective, and that's fine. But none of us are entitled to sharing what we're doing online and meeting blind allegiance and obedience from people and never getting any level of criticism, especially when you choose to post stuff that's inflammatory and that shows clear signs of horse stress and pain. And what I mean by clear signs is signs that are science backed, that are behaviors that horses display when in a state of distress. And it's not really something that's up for major debate because it's just the way things are. And this is what we currently know. If the science changes, then the perspective can change, but there's so much growing evidence that is showing that horses are facing a very high degree of stress on a regular basis because of how we are using them. And there's very huge resistance on the part of people to consider whether or not we need to shift the way that we do things. And that's just a point I wanted to make, because I think that a big shift is coming in the horse community, regardless of whether or not people like it. I also realized that I did the Facebook Live on my main Facebook profile instead of my business profile. So no wonder nobody joined. Whoops. Oopsies. I'm gonna end that. I was trying to do a dual live, but then I forgot I wasn't logged into my Facebook business page. So shout out to me. I guess other people are gonna just have to listen to me talk on my non-horsey page. But yeah, it's something that we need to be more mindful of, because there's a greater consideration for human feelings in the horse world than there is for horse feelings, and that's not the way it should be, because we can advocate for ourselves to a way higher degree than the horses can, and the only real way that horses can advocate for themselves is by showing us behavior and us actually listening to it and speaking for them and advocating for them. And there's a huge lack of willingness to actually consider what horse behavior really means and like where it is stemming from. And it's truly as easy as just being willing to listen and being willing to lean into the discomfort that is considering that there might be perspectives that are coming from a certain place, and that the reason why people are becoming increasingly more outraged with certain topics when it comes to horses is just because the problem is becoming more and more increasingly apparent, and there's a lot of pressure to bring a shift. So we need to do that. But anyways, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. If you don't know what video I'm talking about with the horse being tapped, it's my most recent video that I posted, and you can check it out there. And honestly, it's pretty bad. And to the point where it's like actually so disappointing to see how many people still are willing to defend a horse displaying that level of discomfort. Because it's one of those things that even if people don't believe in rewards-based training and stuff, you would think that they would reflect on like that behavior just being so severe. And it's sad that so many people are still willing to defend it. Like I would say the vast majority of people didn't defend it, but The number that still did, even with the degree of stress the horse was just displaying, is just really, really sad because it shows how much more work we have yet to do. So, anyways, thank you for listening, and I'll see y'all later.